The way that I listen to music obviously has changed because you hear things differently. You know the tricks. You're like, oh, I know like the minor chord there. It's like, oh, they're substituting that, and it like evokes something. Things like that, which all the little things that you kind of go through. But ultimately, I think that the feeling and whatever it is that you put in any, whatever medium it is, when the magic's there, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter how much time has passed, how much you've learned about it, how much different experiences you have. It's either magic or it's not magic.
But can it be magic every day? I mean, some days you must just go in and it must feel like a job.
It feels like a routine, you know. It definitely feels like I definitely have a routine in songwriting and being creative, and I feel like I've definitely worked hard to keep that muscle sharp, because that's my tool for even just experiencing the world. If I don't sharpen that, it starts to have a mind of its own. All of a sudden, like, I'm driving down the street and like things start to take odd shapes and I have no control of it. So I just decide to like, let's focus this in a certain direction.
You feel that life has started to filter through songwriting for you?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of cyclical in that sense, you know. I mean, I've been doing it for so long, and we've kind of cohabitated together for long enough to where it just has become the thing where we're dependent on each other.
Is it conscious though? Are you walking down the street and you see things that you feel like would inform a good song?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, a lot of times, you know, I hear a phrase or something like that, and then sometimes I'll write it down. I have a notepad in my back pocket that you can't see, but I'm reaching into my back pocket right now, lifting myself out of this rolling chair.
Oh, it's like field notes. It looks
this is like a little field note sort of thing. Sometimes I just do. There's a little drawing. It's a long face. It's a little long face drawing.
Why the long face?
I know, huh? I think I had to fill the whole page.
Yeah.
So
this is just sort of absent-minded.
Some of it is. Some of it's like, I don't even know what some of the stuff I'll write, just write it down in the moment. And other times it's more strategic. Like I'll create a task for myself. So this one says, copy short work of literature. Do the same with a record. I have done this before, and I believe it is a good time once a month. One record and one novel. What will it be? Basically, like, sort of when you do...
It's a writing exercise.
Yeah, a
almost.
writing exercise, yeah. So, like, when you, like, are inspired by something and you give yourself these little tasks, I was like, that's sort of I don't know what that was.
What did that mean? Yeah, what did that mean?
I don't know what it means. I think it meant, it was like my tool for a period of time or something. But I think it was more just like verbatim, write down like a short story or something, or like learn a whole record start to finish. So then you get it, you learn it, and then unconsciously it's in there, and then you kind of have the feel of that.
It's an interesting experiment though, because you want to be informed by other things, but obviously you don't want to crib them too closely.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
For some reason, this seems to particularly be a thing in the comedy world, but stand-up comedians who won't go see other comics for fear that they will subconsciously lift things.
Yeah, it's true. Obviously, I know Neil Young has talked about that as well. I've heard him say that. I think that is true. But I'm a big folk music fan to begin with, and so I also know that like varying degrees of that are also how like I think it's part of the culture of what music is on like a social level. Songs sort of evolve and these sort of things happen. So I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think you just have to be like maybe somewhat decisive on what you want to put into your system, because obviously it's like if you never heard music, then you would have really, then you'd have nothing to like base it upon, and you could make really abstract music. But by default, like growing up, I've listened to so many records, and I feel like I'll be in a cab, I'll be in a restaurant, and I hear stuff. So when you sit down to write something, or when you want to do something, it's nice to know, like, okay, well, choosing to put those certain things into your brain, whatever they be. And I do listen to a lot of old folk music for that reason. You hear, like, a lot of the old folk players do, like, like 17 different versions of something, or a song cycle of, like, how the Lonesome Rake or something went through, like, 30 different incarnations, and it, like, bridged, like, country music, it bridged blues music, it bridged jazz music, and it went to all these different things. It went to Britain, it came across back to America. The song cycle is really like important to my songwriting, and I think that it's not something to shun.
My understanding is there wasn't the same idea of ownership of music that there is now. Everybody was just playing everyone else's songs. Obviously now if you lean too heavily on another song, that's where you get into trouble. And, if somebody like George Harrison can lose a lawsuit for accidentally cribbing My Sweet Lord off of somebody, anybody can fall into that trap.
Yeah. I think that's all part of it, though. I think all that stuff is like, music is music, and I think that all that stuff happens, and it's
where you're at right now with regards to your songwriting. And obviously this is something that you've thought about because you have that sitting in your notebook. If you were to tomorrow sit down with an album, learn it back to front, and sort of use that as a launching pad for songwriting, do you have any idea what it might be?
It would, well, I've done it before with like Nick Drake records and things like that. His first one, 5 Leaves Left.
His first and last were a little more minimalist too, so it's sort of easier, I think, versus prior or later. But just sort of sit down and pick it apart and really kind of figure out the elements.
Yeah. I mean, well, the last was a lot more minimal.
The last was, I think, him just sort of sitting against a wall, basically.
Yeah. I think they put a microphone up in front of him, and it was actually kind of like difficult for him. I've heard that from what I've read and things, it's difficult for him to like actually get through them. Whereas
it's difficult for him to make eye contact with people towards the end. That's how deep he was.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there, but I do know that he was having a hard time at the end. But the first record is 5 Leaves Left. I've learned that one, and I like a lot of the British folk music, whether it's Bert Yant, John Renburn, and their band Pentangle, Fairport Convention, or Richard Thompson, or any of those bands from that era. I think I like that stuff because I've like on my own studied a lot of like Appalachian music and where that comes from, British ballads, and it kind of ingrained itself into like what became American and Americana music and stuff. A lot of the droning music, which from Eastern music, and also the bagpipe music, and then modal music, and then how that is like infused itself with the blues, and then how it all kind of mingles with Western music and comes into to popular music. When you love music, you like all that stuff.
How much do you think really being a scholar of that music has informed your writing?
A lot of it has. I mean, it's just more of a passion listening to those records and just listening to music and wanting to know like how those sounds are made. I never really had a chance to spread my wings on a lot of stuff that I had studied and learned, but then when I did a soundtrack for Orange Sunshine, I was able to kind of go into that and kind of take myself out of the equation instead of being like the front, being a singer-songwriter guy. Like, okay, I'm here delivering a song and the story and these kind of things. And so I was able to step back and be like outside of it and let the film run it, be the front person. And I was able to make pieces that were a lot longer and have more movements to them and things. When it came time to make this record, I was able to apply that feeling to it with even cinematically have those sort of a larger picture in mind.
You do want to sort of avoid the trap of being white guy co-opting, the music of other cultures. Can get kind of problematic. Just being concerned about like actually doing that music from another culture justice.
Yeah. I definitely don't think of myself as like being like a preservation act for any of these things. I also think that part of when I make music and if I am like drawing inspiration from things from other eras and other parts of the world, it's more just like, I think that's how music evolves and things. And especially now everyone has so much music from any time in any history and any place is graspable. And I think that's really relevant to like what the evolution of music will become and can be. And I think that certain cultures are like this cultural areas, and music is like dissolving for that reason. And I also think that new music is being born from it. And is it something that we can help, or we can actually sustain, or like we should try to preserve that stuff? I think all that stuff, yeah. But I'm just like living and making music and like loving that and like absorbing it as a life experience.
As somebody who spent so much time finding these things that you love and going back and tracing them and figuring out the cultural and other contexts for that music creation, it is interesting now to see what happens and to find out whether it's for the better that we're losing context. A lot of people, the way people are listening to music are losing a certain amount of context when you can 100%. Yeah, when you can go to Spotify and it will just randomly choose things for you. I think there's always going to be that element, the music nerds of us out there who are going to do their due diligence and find out all that contextual information. But I wonder if the loss of context ultimately is going to be a good or bad thing for music.
I don't know. Yeah, I do think about that. But I also know that like when I experienced music as a young person and when I was really like inspired by it, before I knew where it came from, these different things, it was like, I don't think that like the really like hard to find like music that is native to different areas and like really cultural and like regional specific stuff was that accessible. I had to like seek that out. For me, it was just like, oh, I heard stuff that was on the radio, and then I also had a couple records, and then you really have to want to seek that stuff out. The people that clued me into that stuff gave me the tools to like seek it out further. And so if I were to say, you know, the people that discovered for that reason, or the sounds, even like I didn't know, I was just like, sometimes I'd hear a sound, I didn't know what it was. So I'd have to go through like, you know, 200 records to find out like what it was. And that was like part of the journey. And that was like, that's the fun of it.
It's not just music from other countries, but also punk music. Hunting down a single that you can't find anywhere else. You know? You feel like you had to do some amount of work to find that at a record store.
Oh, yeah. And then when you found it, you felt like there was some like divine, like it was like something like within the universe that like brought you to it.
And by the time you got it, you were already bringing all that information to it.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, no, I know. There's a lot of that. Well, and you like do the research. I mean, there's still, I specifically sometimes won't, you know, if there's a book or something or so like that, like I won't order it over the internet. I'll like seek it out. Like I've gone to certain places and been like requested it, and I'll go back months and months later and like, no, we don't have it. And I want it that much more. And then I start piecing together, like once you plant that seed, like other things start to surface, you know, almost like the unconscious thing within inside of you. It feels like you're tapping into the ether.
It's that thing of once you hear a word, you hear it all the time. Yeah. Like once you know what it means, it starts popping up everywhere.
Totally. But not necessarily though. You know, there are certain things where like I did have a conversation with a friend like that once. I was at a museum and I saw some of William Blake's painting, you know, his drawings and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I haven't seen these ever before in person. He's like, it's just one of those things. When you want to find it, it'll start popping up everywhere. And I was like, no, these things, they're not everywhere. This one isn't everywhere. It's like this has been in the back for a long time. And now I've actually finally got to see it in person. And when you do, then you feel real lucky, you know. And so sometimes that happens. And I think that when you see the origin of it, that's the special thing. But in culture, like in everyday life, yeah, you see the remnants of it, those things. But when you actually get to the source, that's the real stuff right there.
I'm just worried that my music listening is almost becoming like what happens if you're on a site like Tinder for a while. I think really without exception, all of my favorite albums of all time are ones that I had to listen to multiple times to really get into.
Yeah.
And when you're on a Spotify or another music service, it's a lot easier to give up on something.
Yeah.
There's just so much of it that it's easy to just move on to the next thing.
I know what you mean.
It's ghosting, but for albums.
Yeah, I think that definitely happens. I can't say. I mean, I definitely make an effort to like to sit down and listen to things as a whole. But I think that's probably why, you know, live music is so important, because you can go down and really like see someone deliver in person and you know whether they're holding something that you relate to or not. You know, like when you watch the like Old Grey Whistle Test or something like that, you see a bunch of bands go through there and you're just like, they're possessed. And then you see the next person, you're like, well, they're not possessed that day or something like that.
I remember the first time I went to South by Southwest and I was walking down that main drag, was that 8th Street, I think, in Austin. You know, I would walk past these bars and restaurants and there would be 4 floors of bands playing at the same time. And in some sense, it's a wonderful experience, right? You know, you're just surrounded by all this music. And there's also something a little depressing or disheartening about it, that every single one of these bands, they're all playing their heart out. Yeah. A lot of them are sort of like hoping to get discovered. Yeah. And they're just sort of going through the ringer. And as somebody who's a guy with a guitar.
Well, I'll tell you what, man, I had the same thought, but on the opposite end of the spectrum. Was it last night? I was in Philadelphia. There was a little radio convention that was going on. And I went there and there was bands playing, and this guy, William Prince, played. I found out afterwards that he's from Winnipeg. And I watched him play, and he sang his songs, and there was a room full of people there at the World Cafe there. It was like at that spot. And I thought to myself, I don't know how old he was, you know, or is. I ended up talking with him afterwards, but I was standing there thinking, he's good. And I liked his songs, I liked his voice, and I thought to myself, not only is he up there and he's taking me to this other place, but think about all the things that, like, how did he just get here, you know? It's like sort of a phenomenon that person was up there doing the thing, and I was able to think, well, I was just like, I mean, this guy just, you know, I think in order to really, like, to do it for real, you have to just live it. You got to live and breathe it. And if you don't do that, then I don't think that it's worthwhile. You just have to live it.
You feel like it's easy to spot authenticity?
I don't know. I just know that, like, I just thought to myself, this person up there, I was like, that guy lives it. And I believed it. And I just thought to myself, it's wild seeing him up there, and I believe it. And who knows where he comes from, but he's like taking me there. Come to find out, he's from Winnipeg. You know, he's got his songs, and there's a bunch of people there listening to him, and it's a wild thing. I think you just have to, like, I've met a lot of great songwriters and musicians and stuff like that. I think you just have to live it, and everyone lives it in different ways, you know, and that's the magic of this life. But we're all here, you know, we all were born into this life, and it's like, well, we got to do something with it, and you got to make the most of it. And so when you see someone up there, but like all of a sudden you think, how'd you get there? You got to try to get there. He tried, you know, singing his heart out and sat down. I can't imagine. You think about when I see a guy up there singing, I'm like, how many hours does he sit in his room, sitting there like working on these songs and crafting them, and then he gets up there and sings in front of these people.
What do you mean by living it?
To sing them, you have to be them, you know, you have to be inside of it. You have to be inside the songs all the time. I think songwriting or art is like an obsession. When I see that in someone, I believe it. Whether they're successful or not, it doesn't matter. You can tell whether they're obsessed with it. And if they're obsessed with it, then they got something.
Obsession meaning that it's something that you couldn't not do?
Yeah.
It sounds like you've got a pretty, I don't want to say strict, but certainly relative to other musicians, you've, you know, created these structures for yourself. You've created time that you have to write. You've created writing exercises.
Well, those are just to tap into something beyond yourself in order to tell the tales. We exist on this one plane, you know, to get into the other level, it's like meditations in order to get in that zone. So that's all it is. It's like however you want to look at it.
Hear the story about Satisfaction, where Keith Richards wakes up and he's got the riff Satisfaction, I think, like recorded on his bedside or something like that.
Yeah. These
ideas of like the muse and these ideas of really sort of channeling something otherworldly, when it doesn't come that freely, you know, do you feel like you have to force it sometimes?
I'm like trying to evoke the muse, provoke the muse, you know, many times. I'm like, yeah, just like, oh, what does this look like to you over here? Do you want to come
dangle something in front of it?
I dangle things in front of it all the time, you know. You know, you can say things that are really like wordy and deep and get into like, you can be a very like analytical writer, and you can also say things that are very simple. And I don't think that there's no dividing line between the two when you actually tap into the source. And I think that I don't know what that is necessarily, but I know that when you do it, it works. It does come from that like very other place, you know. And it is true. It's a real place, you know. I mean, that's like where all the great art comes from. And then I do think it comes from sitting back and like, I think that you do have to sit back and think about things. And you have to think about things for like maybe months on end or something. And so from my experience, when I went in to make this record, I wrote like 5 different EPs that were all like, I was trying to really like strengthen that muscle into like, and also cleansing the palate in a way. I was like, okay, I'm going to do these, and trying to make something that was like, each one had its own like a definitive place where they lived. And then at the end of that, I knew I wanted to make a record that was, and bring it back to Santa Rosa Fangs now, the record that I did. But like, I knew that I wanted to make a piece that was, had that strong of a concept behind it, or direction, in order for like where the songs would be living together.
As far as having an idea for that broader concept when you actually sit down to write the songs, or figuring out what the through line is?
Both. Yeah, both. I think the through line kind of comes together like when something sort of starts to manifest itself, you know. I think the EPs were like more just like strengthening the idea. Those I kind of was able to sort of put things aside and then be able to look at something larger, and knowing that like it's sort of like if you do that enough, the bigger picture will take shape.
As somebody who's from Northern California originally.
You're from Northern California?
I'm from the East Bay, yeah,
oh, yeah.
Originally. So I know Santa Rosa. Is a place just evocative of a feeling?
Yeah. Well, I think it's more just the sound of it, and like actually just California being associated with all of the saints, you know. So you have like San Francisco, Santa Rosa, San Diego, all those things up and down the coast. And so I felt like Santa Rosa, when I was young, my mother had a rose garden in her front yard. And so those, I would always go out there and either prick myself or I'd smell them. But she would always trim them, and there was always something, there was like 4 of them, you know, in our front yard there. It wasn't a very big yard, but there were 4 rose plants there. I beg your pardon, I never promised you a rose garden. The rose has always been kind of in there.
The roses are almost Catholic, right? You've got the...
Well, they are, yeah.
That thorny crown.
Yeah, thorny crown. I was raised Catholic, too. I went to Catholic school as a kid growing up, and like for many years. So I think all of that sort of like was ingrained in my youth. But going up and down California, and all those cities are there. And so these memories that sort of, you know, stick themselves into you. Yeah, there is something very, very much like that in there. Yeah, that's where it comes from. Probably why I like all the harmonies too. I started singing when I was like in the church when I was a kid, and so they're all just kind of these sort of chanting with the reverb in the church there. So.
What is a day like for you, as far as, again, sort of giving these constraints, or you know, or these like homework assignments? Like, how much time are you spending writing, and does it feel like a day lost if you don't get a certain percentage of a song or do
Sometimes,
a certain amount of writing out of it?
It feels like, well, if I spend a day not doing it, then it feels like a year goes by. I was like, oh man.
You feel guilty?
Oh, yeah, that's where the Catholic guilt comes back in. Yeah.
No, I get the same thing too. I've always been really bad at taking vacations.
But I think you have to do that. That's something I learned when I was a kid in skateboarding. Like I would cause that's what taught me a lot of discipline, was I'd be like, I gotta go out every day and skateboard, and I saw the benefits. Cause school, I was like, whatever, you get like good grades, good bad grades, I don't care about that. I was like, you're gonna like, I'll pass and make it work however I need to. But skateboarding was like, I could like see the like benefits of it. I'm like, I'm going to learn this, do that. And I go out there when I get like the accomplishments that I got from it validated the moment I did that trick. And there's nothing like that can stop you except the only time you put into it, and physically, whether you do it or not, and mentally, if you can get yourself to actually stick it in it, all that stuff. And so I think that taught me like discipline in doing it. And then when I got away from that, then I went more, once I had broken my leg and then I started writing music. I was around 19 years old, and then I got more introspective with the ideas. And then I transferred those same ideas into songwriting. One thing that I realized though is that the kids, like sometimes I would do it every day, you know, I would just not stop. And now I tell myself that I have to take breaks from it, because like some of the greatest things come from when you actually just like take breaks from it. Otherwise you like get so into it that you just like really, you know, you can't see the forest for the trees. Kind of those kind of simple things like that.
One of the many differences between writing a song and skateboarding is, you know, it's clear once you've stuck the landing.
It's true. Yeah, it is true. But then there's also like, there's a lot that goes into it though, whether you like when you stick the landing or not. I mean, it depends on what kind of ground you're riding away on.
You know, you not only know if it's successful, but that particular trick is over. It's much harder to let go of a song.
That's true. That is true. But that's why you would videotape it when you're skateboarding. Then you just have it there. You're like, see that? There it is. But it is true. Well, also, it's harder to let go of a song, and also, yeah, well, songs evolve too. You know, you write it and then it's there in space, and then it takes on different meanings throughout the course of your life and other lifetimes and things like that. That I've only experienced from one perspective, from songwriters who lived generations before me, and I've gotten to have emotional experience to their songs. And also writing songs in my lifetime and seeing throughout periods of my life when they've actually changed meaning, and the people who they originally intended for, they morph and things. And
it's easy when you're really rigorous and studious about something to become a perfectionist with it. And you can't really do that as a songwriter. I mean, at a certain point, the song has to be finished, and you have to move on to the next one.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, you gotta let it go.
Have you gotten better about that?
Of course, yeah. I think that I've gotten better at just letting the songs be. But I think that's why I've actually put out so many records, because it's like I knew in the beginning that you just gotta do it and put it out, and you're gonna like at the time you'll have your feelings about it, and then you'll really know later on whether you like it or not. And there are certain songs that I've put out where I'll be like, I love that song, hate that song. I love that song, and then it flips. You know, a couple years go by, I'll be like, oh, I love that other song, and I hate that song. And I
hate is a really strong word.
Yeah.
But are there ones that you really can't stand?
No, I don't know. I think it's just, I go back and forth with flip-flop. There are times when I love them and times when I don't like them. It all has to do with different circumstances. And there are people, I just definitely know that you can't ever, like, you'll never progress unless you have that perspective or like looking back on your songs like that, because you'll never be able to grow as an artist or songwriter unless or as a human, unless you actually are able to just put it out there and then move on.
So you started writing at 19?
Yeah.
How many albums has it been since then?
This is my fifth record officially as a Matt Costa record. Fifth LP, and then there was I guess it would be the sixth LP because in between there was Orange Sunshine, which is a soundtrack.
Does songwriting get easier over time?
I don't think it gets easier. I think it stays. It's about, I definitely have more like tools, you know what I mean? But it's like, the thing you're trying to achieve is sort of like, it doesn't matter like how like good of a musician you are to write a good song, I don't think. So by default, like all these things, you like get better at playing the guitar, but I don't know necessarily, like that sometimes can hurt a song, you're like, oh, I'm really good at doing this thing, but does that make it a good song? I don't think so. I think sonically sometimes, yeah, you can like, I think certain times I've been able to have like the sonic tools to like for a song, but like, so I'll dress up a song maybe that like isn't a good song. I'll be like, well, that doesn't really work. Or I'll have a song that'd be like, actually, doesn't have all those tricks to it, but I think it's a good song. And so sometimes those things link up, and then other times they don't. And when they link up perfectly, I think that's when it's really special, because those, you strengthen different sides of it. But no, I don't think that there's like, you need to have any of those things to make a good song. I think actually too, it's like eliminating a lot of those things is what makes the better songs, when you just strip back all of that. Try to strip back as much as the mess as possible, because you can throw a bunch of instruments or whatever you want, and I love doing that. It's really fun, that's another part of the process too. You can throw a bunch of things on a track and then just go through and just strip things out, and then you have like, that's a tool for coming up with a certain type of song.
There you go. That was Matt Costa. His new record, Santa Rosa Fangs, is out now. He is also on tour in October and November, so definitely check him out. Thanks, Dan, for taking the time. Thanks to Samantha and Joe at Saxco for helping set up that conversation. Thanks to you guys, as always, for listening to the program. If you like the show, there are a number of ways to support us. You can rate and review us on iTunes or Google Podcasts, or we're on Spotify now. Like us on Facebook. If you have any feedback, it's rolcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Tumblr, that's rlcast.tumblr.com. And I think that's about it for this week, so stick around, because we're going to be back in a number of days with another episode of RIYL.